Welcome to the Visionary Leader's Mind podcast, where we explore the idea of what a visionary leader is, how they work, what it feels like, and how to develop that capability further in yourself. I'm Brad Smith, and my guest today is Benjamin Trehaft. Excuse me. Hi, Ben.
Not to worry. It's one of those. It's one to fumble over.
Yeah, well, I picked an easy one, Smith,
Yeah.
right? There's So let's start out this way, Benjamin, if you would.
Sure.
And we're videotaping this in addition to the audio part. Tell us about yourself and kind of your journey to how you got there and what your current business is.
Well, my journey. Where does one begin on one's journey?
Other than popping out, right? And we don't remember that
Well,
part.
let me see if I can do it very briefly. I'm the product of a medical doctor and a research scientist
Oh,
who, born in Texas, raised in Wisconsin, and then in the East Coast through a combination of public private school environments, a boarding school, then college where I studied English and history, thinking I was going to be a lawyer. Uh, had my early life meltdown and before my senior year, decided that law wasn't going to be the experience that I wanted, and ended up trained as a photographer in commercial portraiture and advertise and fashion. Um,
wow.
Decided that I didn't like having my vision questioned in photography by creative directors who, when you go and you shoot, they tell you, oh, well, why don't you move it 1 inch to the right or 1 inch to the left? And it's like, dude, I know I have the picture in the first frame or two. Why don't we all go to lunch and go work on another problem? That didn't go over so well. So I decided rather than make the personal investment of the fight for what I thought was right on those topics because they were paying and I just had already lost interest, started working on the solutions to enable others to realize their vision. So that led me through a process of, you know, at that time, which would be the late 90s, early 2000s, and through, the middle 2010s, um, working on digital imaging, the transition of imaging from film to digital. So I worked on everything from the early digital cameras, the design, the workflow related to them, the experience of working with one from a photographer's perspective,
Oh, wow.
to try
Yeah,
to
right.
actually make the things work because they didn't work so great at the beginning,
No.
to the software and then the post processing those workflows right up to the publication levels for for publishers like Condé Nast or for advertisers, and advertising holding companies. So just how do you make it all really efficient? So you just realize that vision and you just get on with it and you work on the next problem. Um, so that's my story of how I came up. How did I end up at what I'm doing now? I run a nonprofit called Global Engineer, or excuse me, I run a global nonprofit called Helpful Engineering that began a little more than 2 years ago. In It sprung up to address shortages in the medical supply chain in the early days of the pandemic, before the pandemic even actually hit Europe. There were a few data driven people that saw what was happening in Asia and started it was beginning to happen around the world. Some of them were economists. It just was obvious to all what this outcome would be, which was a disruption, and that it was a disruption that was going to kill a lot of people. And that screamed threat. It
Yeah.
screamed, and so we had a bunch of people. Started out 10 people on a Slack. I wasn't there at that moment, but I was there within a week when that 10 became about 300-400. And then 3 weeks later, it became 13,000,
That's fast.
and now it's hit just about, it's tapered to about just about 20,000 and still growing. But we began to look at how do you mitigate this kind of a situation. It began in this use case of medical device, which were where our skill sets lied. Most of the folks were engineers. We have a broad range of contributors to this problem solving community that just didn't like the fact that things didn't work, and they were angry about it because they saw needless suffering and waste of
Right.
human life. So that's how we came to be where we are, and that's how I ended up being asked to lead the thing, just by virtue of the fact that I was the only one that had kind of built and led any kind of business organization, as I built my own business in imaging. So I was going around kind of serving an inspector general function, solving problems in those early couple of weeks. And finally, they were like, look, you're the only one that has that's really sort of serving this function. Why don't you lead the thing? And I was like, okay, I didn't actually know I really wanted to do this, and I had a lot of trepidation about it, but it needed doing, and that's it.
Well, if you got some of the tools, you work to get the other tools, and you pull people together.
You
So
know, there's no training for this.
Well, there's
there
no,
really
you're
isn't.
not duplicating anything. This is new.
There's maybe some preparation you can do, but no actual training.
No. Well, which is why the visionary mind is, visionary leader's mind is important. It's like, you collectively, you had a vision. And then how do you make that happen? Right?
Yeah, it when we talk about this sort of thing, I mean, in our case, what we began to realize is that we were solving lots of little problems, but the little problems in and of itself weren't the big solution. So we could make a piece of PPE very quickly and easily, and we did that. And some of our earliest designs have been made tens of millions of times.
Right.
They're all free open source designs, so you can go make the thing and put your sticker on it. We don't care. But the bigger problems, we realized that there were bigger systemic issues that were really the big ones, and solving the little ones wasn't so meaningful. You needed to really comprehensively tackle this if we were not going to have the same outcome the next time this happens, and it will happen. So it might not be just in medical, there could be any other type of disruption that could come. And if you're able to function in that state, that really trying state of disruption, you can function in steady state conditions. Right. So that was what, we realized maybe in the first month of the whole thing, that really the problem that we were trying to solve for was that. And everything came from that. In terms of the vision, what came that when you realize what you're trying to solve for, you realize what it enables, which is, we see a very prosperous, fluid world where people have access to the resource they need. And when I say resource, the appropriate the right education to realize their vision of what they want to accomplish in the world within the constraints that do exist, but they're able to understand what those constraints and those frameworks are, because there is a path through the graph, if you will, to being successful in this world. Right. But understanding it is an opaque process right now, and we want it to actually be pretty simple to understand.
To engineer it.
Feel like, they feel like they have a chance to make the life that they want.
Right. Right. Which I want for everybody. My greatest fear over the last probably 15 years, maybe 25, is that Ebola, to go back to kind of what you were talking about, Ebola and a rhinovirus would hook up somewhere and decide they were going to have babies, and it would be an airborne Ebola. And that freaked me out. It's like we would be cooked as a human race. Especially
one of the early, it's funny you mentioned that, because my early conversations with my mom, a microbiologist,
right,
virologist.
There you go.
So my early our early conversations centered around the data on wonder.cdc.gov around this, when the early days of the pandemic. So, and we were looking at this stuff, and we were like, they're missing this. The data set's already really bad because every state reports differently. They don't measure what's going on the same way, which is already it's already offensive to me.
Right.
That just that there's that lack of understanding that these things, we got to measure stuff the same way to know what's going on. But the other thing, and that makes it very hard to cooperate when you don't perceive the same things. Makes it impossible to collaborate when you don't perceive.
So how do you go from a management perspective, which that frustration would be a management thing, to a leadership thing, right? I mean, that's how I describe the difference between management and leadership is is leadership is asking questions and painting the target, and management is getting down into the weeds in the tactical piece and making things happen.
It's very executional at that point. Yeah. I
Right.
mean, great
But you've got to
managers are
have,
super executors. No
yeah.
question about it.
So you got to have both.
Yeah. So really, in this respect, you know, it's about your ability to perceive, to perceive in the right, what is the data that's actually out there, and assemble a logical model of that data, and then be able to describe it or communicate it in a way that it resonates with others. And that actual process is actually really quite, it's pretty well understood in many respects. I
Well,
mean, we have
yeah,
diffusion of innovation, whether it's diffusion of innovation
there we
theory,
go, right there,
which
right?
there's one of the great ones, or or some of the outcomes of theories that outcome from from Levin's field theory in social psychology, which is really a unifying field theory. I mean, I actually think it's a much bigger and more important theory, not just for social psychology. I actually think it's probably going to do the theory of everything as solid on that one. I think it's a really ideal framework. But change theory comes out of that. How do you get what you want? And there's some great leaders today that use change theory, which is just understanding what the truths are in the data, the information that they assemble, and then the intelligence that comes out of that they can then act on. That is all done by the reasoning.
Right.
It's the ability to perceive and then reason about it and put together a
The logical
a
process.
cogent and coherent.
Yeah, right. Well, how do you go from insight, right? And so part of what I wanted to talk to you about today was, and thank you for that kind of run up. You were involved in a group that pulled together essentially an epiphany that says, we've got an issue. And then, that was the insight. So
there was a common perspective, a common perception that this issue existed. Yes.
right. It's like, but just before that is the moment where you go from the blank mind, the thinking about what you're thinking, to the insight. And
Okay. Yeah.
a visionary leader requires insight. If you don't have insight, you don't actually have the visionary, right? And so I want people to understand that everyone has some level of that insight ability already in them. Some of our great leaders have been, well, let's put it, I'll ask you, right? Of the visionary leaders, who are the top 2 or 3 visionary leaders that may not be alive today, may be alive today, like that kind of pop up in your mind? And we can talk about what makes them better and different.
Well, the one who's alive right now, is, in certain respects, it's Elon.
Yeah.
I think Elon understands truth, but what do we mean by truth? I think what he mean by truth is that he understands, what I would call he understands enough universal truths. And when I say universal truths, I mean in the context of physics or cosmology, like right on down to the way that they get represented on Earth and in a human being, because it's just, you're part and parcel of the whole thing. I know that might sound a little drippy to some people, but that's fact. You are a combination of the same matter and energy that exists everywhere, and you're going to behave that way according to the rules of the way that things work. Now, those things can assort in a lot of different ways, and that explains why people have they're in different places, they have a little different thoughts, but humans have that same property or that capability of insight. It's intrinsic. And it doesn't matter where you are, you might come about it in a different way, but you got it. No question about it. What then happens is, whether that intuition, which is that guiding questioning about like that there's a there, but I don't know what the there is, that leads to that, the insights that you might put together to have that gotcha moment epiphany. Like, okay, now it makes sense, the parts fall into place kind of thing. is the way I would look at
When
it.
that happens, the definition of intuition is it's direct knowing without access to the analytical mind, access or use of the analytical mind. So in other words, when the insight drops in, when that feeling drops in, right, you know it's accurate. And
Yeah,
then,
the way that I think about it is this: is that some people, they call that that intuition. It's an instinctive thing. I think that there's an instinctive recognition of truth and instinctive. Some people instinctively get math. My brother instinctively gets just got mathematics. All
oh,
right.
cool.
No, like I mean he's a really interesting individual, but he just the way Goodwill Hunting was like I could just play. Noah could always just play. All right. I didn't actually get math maybe until a couple of years ago. Not the way that people really like him get math, but I
Right,
did understand geometry. All right. Which is just a different way to get into math.
right,
Geometry is math.
right. Well, I had a better time with math than I did with calculus, or with geometry, you
Well,
know.
the calculus is also mathematics.
Oh,
It's
of
just
course
a
it is.
different field of it, just a different
It's
class of
just,
it.
it's just a little bit smaller in its
Yeah,
breaking
it's
point.
just this one set of knowledge. But that's exactly my point. I think that whatever your way into it is almost doesn't matter. What matters is that you have to find, like anything else, if you're going to draw a line, and from there you're going to define patterns or shapes within these and create a
Right,
topology of understanding. It doesn't matter. You need 2 points to begin. 1 point doesn't matter, and then you got to add another one that starts to frame out your understanding of the world, that gives you that gives you some sort of addressable space within the
right.
world.
It pulls the perimeter for what you can understand as you said, facts, right? What are the circumstances and how do we get to a deeper understanding? And then how do we
Well, facts and truth are different.
well, I was an analytical chemist. I know how deep you can mess with facts.
Do what you make of them.
Right,
I, I,
right,
I'm no great lover of Kellyanne Conway, but when she said that there are alternative facts, actually, yeah, sure. You have your facts right now. I got mine.
right,
Are our facts interoperable? Are your facts well reasoned and assembled into information? I have no idea, man. But they
right,
probably have. But if they're not, I'm going to figure that one out, and then I'm going to figure out whether or not, how we're going to interact and transact into, have a conversation.
I've on my wall over here, I've got a list of values. And for a very long time, I had capital T truth, which is absolute truth, not little t truth.
Yep.
Little t truth. So my pursuit in life is to drive my understanding of myself and the whole world from as hard as I can toward from my little t truth into the capital T truth. What's
Yep.
actually true? And then, of course, how do you repeat it over and over again, right? Doesn't matter what you put in the beaker, if you put it in different circumstances, like, the top of Mount Everest, as opposed to sea level, right? It's going to act different.
Yeah,
So,
sure. Well, and that's why Lewin's theory is such a perfect unifying theory. If you just change, so Lewin's theory, his field theory in psychology, is behavior equals person by environment. If you change the person to entity, or whatever, and we
right,
define that entity as whatever object that is, could be what's in your beaker, right?
right.
How that behaves is going to be influenced by the environment.
Yeah,
End of
absolutely.
conversation.
Right. I can't wait. I can't wait for an alien to show up on the planet and start having open conversations with us, right? But
So
I'm
you immediately made me think of two things. First is Robert A. Heinlein's like really terrific story about like alien comes to Earth to want to talk to the leader of the free world.
right,
Goes to first goes to I don't know, he lands in Europe or whatever. They take him to the UN. He talks to the Secretary General. He's like, no, you're not it. The UN convenes. They all talk and they're like, what does he mean? Like it's Secretary General of the UN. Well, you know what? Let's have him talk to the President of the United States. So they take him to Washington, roll out the red carpet. President and First Lady are there. Alien meets them, and he's like, "Yeah, you're not it either." And the president's like, "I'm the Secretary General didn't work for you. I'm the technical leader of the free world here." And the alien's like, "Yeah." And he looks around, and this is back in the days before, when it was still limousine. And he looks in the back of the, he sees a limousine in the driveway of the White House. He sees the president's dog in the back seat, and he goes, "That's who I want to talk to. He's the boss." And of course, the reason that follows for that is that everybody's life lives around their dog, taking care of their dog. That was the story. That was what that was really about. I thought that was really very funny.
What's the title? What's the title of that?
What's the conversation the alien's going to have with
right.
us? I'm like, is he even going to want to talk to us, or is he going to want to talk to the dog?
Right.
We're not the only ones who live here.
No. Well, I'm of the opinion we're in quarantine because we haven't figured out life yet. So
I think that's probably pretty true.
Right. So, all right. So let's go down through. When you have an epiphany, there's a certain feel to it. And there's a run up to that moment. Either you're asking yourself questions, right? When I was in analytical chemistry, I would map out all the things I knew about that formula I was working on, formulation, and I would recognize it wasn't working because I had a gap in what I knew. And I would go take a nap.
A logic model and a map with to identify a gap. It's a very useful tool.
It is. Well, that's what the analytical mind is for, right? It's a dissection engine, if you would.
Sure.
Right? So I would go take a nap and I would wake up with a solution almost all the time, 90% of the time, which I thought was a pretty good record, So, and I did that for 6 or 7 years straight on. So what I found, what I want for people to understand is maybe from your experience, when you have a challenge like that, how long does it take for you to ask and then have the solution, if you would, bubble up into your consciousness? And then how does it feel when it shows up?
A relief is the way that it feels, because I'm just like, ugh. Some of the stuff I think about ends up being, the stuff that we work is you have to solve at that level of capital T truth. And trying to solve at that level can, in the words of one of my colleagues, break anyone's brain.
Yep.
Especially if you because when you go from that truth then down through the permutations of the trees, the complexity. Look, you can only handle out about 7 orders that's 7 pieces of information, and the computations on those is as much as a good brain can handle.
A good brain.
Maybe an extraordinary one can go to 11, but I can't do that. I don't have 11 speeds. I can handle maybe 7, but that's a lot. Just do the math on that. That's a lot.
It's a lot of permutations. You bet.
It's a lot of computation, and you're not the first guy I've ever heard who was like, when I have a real tough nut to solve, I'll I park it aside and I go take a nap. Now, for me, for a long time, for a lot of my life, I couldn't do that. It's kind of only once you have those first 2 points and the rest starts falling into place, the computations become easier.
Right. Well, and it's practice. I had an attorney one time tell me, like, when I've got a problem to solve, I dig myself into it. I look at all the literature. I dig. And then when I've been into it for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, right, then the solution comes to me. But she had to lay out all the different information in her mind, So that's the correlation.
A lot of complexity.
Huge amount.
Lawyers have some of the most reasoned minds. Like, it's staggering the logical models that they have to work with and the complexity of them if they're good.
Yep. So what that's gotten me to is an understanding. We have the conscious mind, right? We have consciousness, right? We have kind of the sphere in our brain that'll handle information. So the analytical mind does words and numbers. I know because I had a concussion that took out my front left lobe, and I was down for analytical for 2 years solid, right?
Ouch.
2 years, yeah. And I had to rebuild my brain. And the only way I could do that was like step into it piece. One little bitty step. Okay, if I take these supplements, the brain will heal itself. and I have to give it time. So the analytical mind was gone, and the thinking apparatus that I had left during that 2-year period, which freaked me out really bad,
Oh, it's
was
very disorienting. I'm sympath. I quite understand. I can really empathize with it. You know,
right. So what I,
anybody that's had a depressive event has been through that situation. By the
yep,
way, it's a these days they think of these things as traumatic brain injuries,
yeah,
and
TBIs, you
it's the
bet.
same. It's just how bad
What,
is similar recovery. You know.
what was left over in my thinking ability during that 2-year period, and then I could feel it start, the analytical mind to kind of piece back in after 2 years, was my concept engine. I could think in concepts straight out, right? So that was the assimilation or the accumulation, correlation of concepts. But then it took me an immense amount of work during that 2-year period to correlate it then down into words and numbers.
Yeah.
So as
You have
my
to reform
analytical,
all those associations. With
right, the
all of the,
associations were easy, right? But that taught me straight in, oh yeah, we're going to set your analytical mind aside for 2 years and then give you another 1.5 years of kind of grow back. So it was like
you have
three
to
and a
be
half
forgiving
years
to
after
yourself
that.
during those times. You have to be really
This is
patient.
horrific.
You have to be very kind to yourself.
Yeah.
To do that
Well,
work. It's hard.
sleep
It's
a
hard.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yep. And yeah. So and what caused it was somebody used the back end of my car for a brake.
Great.
I knew it was coming. So at any rate,
No.
but I didn't realize how bad it was until the next day. I had to park my car in town and get to a meeting. Well, I'd parked 12 blocks away from where I was supposed to be, and I couldn't figure out how to do it except to walk on foot to get there. I was just glad I knew the town well enough to do that.
To be able to do that. Well,
But I didn't
it's
realize how
interesting.
bad
I
it
don't know if you know
was.
about patient zero. One of the ways that they study, the way that we've come to understand the way the brain works is, of course, by studying deficits, because it's not humane to cut into somebody who's healthy. So as we look at deficits, or as a result of trauma, typically, or trauma from disease, or it doesn't matter what. I mean, it's a huge body. They don't look at one person. They've looked at many hundreds of thousands over the last 100 years. Patient zero is, of course, the one that's most interesting from the short and long-term memory. He lost all his ability to form short-term memories, but he could still find his way around town, the long-term memories. And he was kind of our key to beginning to understand how knowledge moves into deep memory and we retain it. So he began the process of us being able to actually map how the brain works and functions, the systems.
It's an amazing tool.
Nothing else like it, but nothing else like brains.
Nope. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So another question then. What's the difference in your experience between an epiphany and intuition functioning?
So, to me,
I'm going to start with epiphany.
Intuition is it's a perceptive thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever, your intuition, something has triggered it. All right. Something is telling you there is a there. The following step is, that leads to that, epiphany. You might have an insight or two, but the epiphany is when the parts fall into place. It's that,
right.
Yeah. And
it's
then
that electric.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's usually
thunderbolt.
it's I'm very fond of saying, all things are complicated until they're easy, and that's when the moment hits that it's all of a sudden then it's easy.
Right.
The blocks. It's like you solve the. I was looking around to see if I had a Rubik's cube.
Now that's like, okay.
Oh, there, I'm there. It's done.
Right.
Now I
well,
can work on the next one.
And the people that can do that in 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever the record is. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it's impressive. I can't.
No. Maybe a week.
Every once in a blue moon, I surprise myself. I keep one around to fiddle around with, but usually they can take me a long time until they don't.
Right. Right. So if an epiphany is kind of the correlation of everything, it kind of fits into place, and intuition is the kind of precursor to that. How does that fit into leadership? In other words, if someone has that ability and can call on a consistent basis, and they know that, right? I thought of Abraham Lincoln was actually one of those. Benjamin Franklin was another one. Those are kind of my, and George Washington, those three guys were kind of like my first heroes in that realm, if you would.
Yeah.
But we've got Einstein, we've got Elon Musk today, we've got Stephen Jobs, who's just, left our world. And if they have that, if there's, I don't think these are even measured for it. It's like NQ, right? IQ is analytical. NQ is the intuition. I'll coin that, right?
Yeah.
They're above the normal population level.
Well,
How does it fit together?
I I don't know that I like the word above. They're just, they've just maybe they've gotten to some place first that other people can get to. But how does it fit together? It's not much use if you can't explain it and get buy-in, leading to some adoption of that epiphany as a truth or as a possibility, potential outcome. So you have to have adoption, you have to have buy-in.
Okay.
And like when another leader I would add to all, to your list there, to go back even further, would be a contemporary of Einstein's, would have been Oppenheimer,
Oh,
who
yes.
actually, Oppie actually, or Turing, Alan,
Yep.
these guys actually got people to buy in and make something happen, and it
Yep.
was like not trivial what they made happen.
No.
And you know part of and this was the problem, I think, with all with most leaders that kind of do this. I think we've gotten better for the most part over time. There's always some people out there that really perceive something, and they see that truth, or a truth with a capital T, that they becomes an actionable thing that can make a better reality, or make a reality happen. And you know I think in those cases, they have to be able to break it down for everybody, and
Yep.
then help them. You got to enable them to get to those conclusions. Now, if you know what all those parts are, in other words, if you've reasoned through it, so that you haven't made that leap so drastically that you don't know yourself how you get there,
Yeah.
you're going to have to work backwards and
Right.
break it out and find the supporting evidence that goes along with it, that confirms it. First off, you need that confirmation for yourself, but you also need it, and then you have to figure out, kind of how to, you have to bring everybody else along with you, so you got to help them work through to come to the same steps of understanding that you have. So here's an example for me about one that I'm teasing around with now and playing with. So I think a lot about game theory and evolutionary decision making. I just do that for fun, but that's the
Okay.
kind of high level. I feel like I have to think about that kind of decision making because I'm interested in collective decision making.
Wow.
And
Cool.
so if I'm going to get other people to agree with me, if I'm going to persuade them, I need to we need to have some agreement about how we're going to reason together, which includes understanding the language, understanding the logic of language, and see if we come to the same understandings or conclusions about some of these things, including the meanings of a few things. So here's an example of the kind of thing that I'm toying around with now.
Okay.
I'll give you a statement. A decision is a decision. A non-decision is also a decision.
Yep.
All decisions have outcomes. Now, it's interesting. I put this up, a version of that right now. It's a poll on LinkedIn, and I'm fascinated by the analytics that are coming in around it.
Hmm.
So the version of it I put up is: all decisions are evolutionary decisions. All non-decisions are evolutionary decisions. Do you agree or disagree?
Oh, that's a great
And
question.
it's fast. The numbers are really fascinating. So this is what I've observed. I put this up last night at like midnight or something like
Okay.
that. And so today, um, Yeah, in fact, I'll look while we're on this call.
I'm going to have to track that
This is going to
down.
be fun. I'm curious, just to see what the metrics are right now on this thing. All right, so here we come. Come on, wake up. So as of today, I've had just about 500 people have looked at that post. Now, just because it went through their feed, they had to click on it to see the actual thing. Okay,
Right.
so this is already a number of people. Um, uh, and what I can tell you is that only 4 people have clicked a yes or no answer out of 500 that have looked. Now that's interesting. I don't know quite what that means. Either they didn't know what to make of it. They haven't. They're still thinking about it. They're going to be able to come back and look at it over the next 6 days. That's okay. Um, uh, well, no, it just went to 500. But the other thing that I can tell you is that since that poll went up, um, I had 10. Even though they didn't vote on it, I've had 10 extra people follow me. So I'm looking at the number of followers.
That's fascinating.
So I have no idea what it all means, by the way, at this point. I just think it's really interesting that it's clearly people are thinking about it. It's puzzling. They don't know what to make of it. Is that because it's a complex statement? It's more complicated than you might think.
It'll be interesting to check in with you and see, like in 2 or 3 days, what
Well, the
what comes out of
intention, and
that.
I wrote this in the post that goes with it, is I'm going to put up a statement or a set of statements like this every day for a week. And at the end of, at the end of the whole thing, I'll report back the numbers, the
Good.
results comprehensively, the way you and I just talked about them. So
Right.
those dimensions that I'm tracking, how many each day, then how many people came, how many different votes came in on a particular day, and then what was the consensus on the actual survey topic.
Right.
I'm just curious. I have no idea what's going to happen.
Well, but it's good to make people, I want to make people think, right? Isn't that the point?
I think it's a pretty provocative. It's a pretty provocative statement in some ways.
Right.
I want people to think about my purpose in this is that I actually do think that there's real cost associated with inaction, and I think that the you know I don't believe in no cost decisions. There's
Well,
always a cost.
I'm going to back it up even further. I'm of the firm opinion that every occurrence in the world has a cause. So there's cause and effect all the way around us, no matter what, right? I make the decision to stop at a stop sign. I make the decision to roll through the stop sign, right? I make the decision to, as I've done occasionally and not realized it, go straight through the stop sign or the stoplight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, there was, okay, there's consequences all over the place.
Sure, absolutely, and consequences have are costs, have costs associated, and now the consequence can look that a balance sheet is a great framework to describe cost, benefit, and
Right.
what comes out. There's and how many realities are we talking about are impacted by this one? I mean, there's your balance sheet, there's mine right now on this call. All
Right.
right. There's our respective environments. There's actually 4 here because there's you, me, the room around us, whoever's in the room with you or in the house with you, and then we go up in order to the bigger environment. That has
Right.
its reality too, and these things all interact, right? So you can't escape the big one. It's coming down right on down to us here, right? And so, but if we're not on a page about these things or aware of them or mapping costs across them and benefits across them, you're not able to make optimal decisions.
Yep.
And I
Absolutely.
mean, this gets you to another interesting question of what is an optimal outcome or an optimal decision at a given point. And this is a fascinating question that I've been
That,
thinking
that
about.
that gets down to measurement, right?
It
And
sure
then what
does.
you choose to measure, right? And so, yeah, if the analytical mind and the intuitive mind don't play together well, that's a training I actually put myself through. So I started meditating and doing breathing exercises. Oh man, it's been 35 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. And 6 months into that period of time, I realized that I was thinking differently. Talk about the ability to correlate information, right? I recognized that my ability to correlate had grown by a factor of 6. I could correlate 6 times as much stuff in the work that I was doing that I could before. And then recognizing that it was my intuition that had grown, I had to go back and train my analytical mind and my intuitive mind to work together to optimize both sides.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about, meditative or mindfulness practices, whatever form of it you do,
Right.
is, it's one of those things, I call it a calibration activity.
That's fun.
Well, think about it, if you think about it, the whole point of these things is to quiet oneself. So you have to do that. And so essentially you're becoming aware of what is the noise in your system, so
right.
that you can adjust, so you can compensate or filter it, enable your ability to process it, understand what it is, what's the nature of that noise, what are you actually thinking or feeling, and either get a grip on it, know that you should pay attention to it, or do away with it one way or another. I think of it in a weird way. Like tinnitus is one that I think many people start to get aware of. It can be very distracting. Tinnitus is caused by a little bit of damage in, like the hair, the cilia of your ears.
Yep.
That, your brain is looking for a signal. It's not getting it. That's where that little humming is. All right. It's not getting enough signal. It's a filter problem, if you will, or it's a signal to noise ratio problem. I mean, however you want to look at it, it's a straight up electrical problem that's coupled to some physical, changes in physical condition. And, it's fascinating. Like, I think of it that way in a weird way. It makes me think of the same thing. It's like taking a mindful moment to calm down, become aware of these things, then lets you kind of internally adjust your software to compensate. It's like being able to adjust your little slidey bars on your microphone to get rid of noise.
Or a lot of other things that you can do, right? I have learned that, right? For me, the practice of meditation is withdrawing my, what I call active will, out of a particular part of myself. First, it's my physical body, then it's my emotional self, then it's my, analytical mind, then it's my intuitive mind. And as you do that over years, eventually you get to the place where you have the choice of putting any of those levels, putting your will into it and activating it, or bringing your will out of it and letting it just be in, solid, quiet state. Mm-hmm. So to go along with your kind of calibration process.
There are different perspectives on kind of the same thing, I think.
Yeah.
It's everybody's got to solve that problem. It's one we all got to do.
Right.
Might use a different technique, a little bit of a different process, or put some different language to how we describe it, but we're all doing the same thing.
Right. We are, to the best of our abilities in the moment.
Sure.
Good.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
So thank you for being, and what is this? I got to read through this because I got to get more practiced at this. The Visionary Leader's Mind podcast. And for my listeners, as I wrap up, remember to keep pursuing your dreams and learning so that you can guide this world with your insights, epiphanies, and hidden brilliance, because we need your visionary leader's mind. Thank you so much.